The chandelier above the dining table at La Belle Étoile glittered like a constellation trapped in crystal, casting fractured light across the room. It was December 15, 2026, and the air buzzed with the clink of champagne flutes and the murmur of 40 carefully selected guests. Evelyn Harper sat at the center of the horseshoe-shaped table, her navy silk dress clinging softly to her frame, a picture of poised elegance. Beside her, her husband, Nathan Pierce, radiated the kind of charisma that filled a room broad-shouldered, impeccably tailored, his dark hair swept back with just enough gray at the temples to suggest wisdom rather than age. 5 years of marriage had brought them here, to this anniversary dinner he'd orchestrated with the precision of a maestro, and Evelyn had played her part perfectly until tonight. The guests were a mix of Nathan's world. Sleek business associates in custom suits, their wives dripping in understated luxury, and a handful of Evelyn's relatives relegated to the table's edges like afterthoughts. Nathan had insisted on the venue, a Michelin-starred restaurant perched atop a downtown high-rise, its floor-to-ceiling windows framing the city skyline like a trophy. 5 years of triumph, the gold embossed in VY Tatyons had declared, and Nathan had spared no expense. White orchids cascading down the table, a string quartet tucked in the corner, their music weaving through the hum of conversation. Evelyn traced the edge of her wineglass with a fingertip, her hazel eyes catching the light as she watched him work the room. He was in his element, shaking hands, tossing out witty remarks, the king of his carefully constructed empire. She'd spent half a decade building something to an empire of her own, though Nathan never saw it. To him, she was the quiet poet's daughter, the woman who traded her graduate degree in comparative literature for a life of domestic tranquility, a decorative accessory to his success. He'd never noticed the way her smile tightened at his patronizing quips, or how her silence wasn't vacancy but vigilance. Tonight, that illusion would shatter. Dinner unfolded with the elegance of a rehearsed performance. Plates of seared scallops and truffle risotto appeared and vanished, the sommelier refilling glasses with a vintage Bordeaux. Nathan had chosen to impress. Evelyn played her role flawlessly, nodding at the right moments, laughing softly at his jokes, her voice a gentle counterpoint to his booming confidence. But beneath the table her fingers brushed the leather clutch in her lap, where a slim thumb drive and a business card waited like loaded dice. At 8:45 p.m., as the servers cleared the main course, Nathan's oldest friend and business partner, Colin Reese, stood and tapped his glass with a spoon. The room hushed, all eyes turning to Nathan, who rose with the ease of a man accustomed to command. He lifted his champagne flute, the golden liquid catching the light, and granted a smile that carried the faintest edge of mockery. 5 years ago, he began, his voice rich and deliberate, I took a gamble. My buddies here, he gestured to Colin and a cluster of smirking associates, told me marrying a woman like Evelyn was a risk. A literature nerd, they said, too caught up in her dusty books to keep up with a guy like me. But I saw something they didn't. He paused for effect, letting the anticipation build. A wife who'd stay out of my way, content with her poetry and her little hobbies, while I built something real. 5 years wasted on a pretty face who struck gold with mean damn. Did it pay off? The laughter that followed was uneven, some guests chuckling obligingly while others shifted uncomfortably. Evelyn's sister, Lila, seated at the table's far end, flushed red, her fork clattering against her plate. Nathan's mother, Diane, pursed her lips, her diamond earrings glinting as she tilted her head in faint disapproval. Evelyn, though, kept her expression serene, her lips curving into the soft smile she'd perfected over years of his dismissals. Touching, she said, her voice cutting through the fading laughter, smooth as silk but sharp enough to turn heads. Nathan's grin faltered as she stood, reaching for the manila folder she'd slipped from a side table drawer. I'd like to offer a toast of my own. She slid the folder across the table toward him, its contents fanning out slightly photocopies of a prenuptial agreement, side-by-side comparisons marked with red ink. Funny thing about gold digging, Nathan. It only works if there's something to take. This prenup you had me sign? Turns out it's a forgery. You swapped pages after I signed, thinking I'd never notice. Legally it's void and you're left with nothing. The room stilled, the quartet's violin suddenly too loud in the silence. Nathan's hand hovered over the folder, his eyes narrowing as he flipped it open. His face drained of color, the smugness replaced by something raw and unsteady. "What the hell is this, Evelyn?" he muttered, loud enough for the nearest guests to hear. "Oh, it gets better," she replied, pulling her phone from her clutch. Her thumb hovered over the screen, then pressed down. A chorus of chimes erupted as every phone in the room lit up with notifications. Guests fumbled for their devices, their expressions shifting from confusion to horror, as they scrolled through the screenshots she'd sent months of explicit text between Nathan and his mistress, Tara Bennett, a Pilates instructor who'd once been Evelyn's gym buddy. "She's clueless," one message read. "Too busy with her books to notice a damn thing." "What have you done?" Nathan hissed, half rising from his chair, his knuckles whitening around the folder. "Exactly what you never thought I could," Evelyn said, her tone calm but unyielding. "I paid attention." Phones clattered onto the table as guests processed the betrayal laid bare before them. Diane stared at her screen, her hand trembling, while Nathan's father, Richard, turned his gaze to the window, jaw tight. Lila moved to stand behind Evelyn, her hand resting on her sister's, should air a silent declaration of allegiance. Colin, flipping through the prenup, muttered, "Nathan, is this true? Did you fake this?" Before Nathan could respond, the private room's double doors swung open. A woman in a tailored gray suit strode in, her auburn hair pulled into a sleek bun, a leather briefcase swinging at her side. Two men followed, their presence quiet but purposeful. "Perfect timing," Evelyn said, nodding to the woman. "Nathan, meet Lauren Kessler, me attorney. She's got the divorce papers ready. Thought we'd serve them with dessert." Lauren's heels clicked against the hardwood as she approached, her smile polite but edged with steel. "Mr. Pierce," she said, placing the portfolio on the table. "You might recognize me from the gala last spring. I specialize in divorce and financial crimes." Nathan's eyes widened, recognition dawning. "You read that tax lawyer," he stammered, the pieces falling into place too late. "Among other things," Lauren replied, sliding the divorce documents toward Evelyn. "Everything's prepared as we discussed. The EVY has been filed with the appropriate authorities." Nathan lunged for the papers, but Colin grabbed his arm. "Don't," he warned, his voice low. "You're making it worse." His eyes darted between the prenup and his own phone, where Tara's messages glowed accusingly. Evelyn watched the chaos unfold with a strange detachment, her mind drifting to the moment this had all begun. 3 years ago, she'd been dusting the study, Nathan's sanctum of power, lined with mahogany and leather, when his phone rang. He'd answered it on speaker, assuming she was too absorbed in her task to listen. "Route the Larson funds through the offshore account," he'd instructed his CFO, his tone casual. "The IRS won't dig that deep. Evelyn's too busy with her novels to care what's on the books." She'd kept her back turned, her hand steady as she polished the shelves, but her phone, propped against a vase, recorded every word. That night she'd started her system. A hidden email account where she sent photos of documents he left scattered on his desk, transcripts of overheard calls, notes on his habits, his late-night meetings, his coded references to consulting fees. At first it was about pride, a quiet rebellion against his condescension. "You wouldn't get it, Ev," he'd say, his voice dripping with superiority. "Your degree's great for quoting Shakespeare, but this is the real world." She'd smile, nod, play the part of the simple wife he'd cast her in, all while her collection grew. The turning point came 18 months ago. Nathan had left his tablet unlocked on the kitchen counter while he showered, and a message from Tara popped up. "Last night was unreal. Can't wait for next time she's out of town this weekend, right?" Evelyn's stomach had twisted, but her hand stayed steady as she opened the thread. Months of messages spilled out, each more damning than the last, mocking her, plotting around her, reveling in her supposed ignorance. She'd screenshotted everything, added it to her archive, and reset the tablet before he returned. When he emerged, towel around his waist, she'd greeted him with coffee and that same practiced smile, but inside, her hurt had hardened into resolve. She'd reached out to Lauren a week later, framing it as a casual coffee between old college friends. "Hypothetical question," she'd said, stirring her latte. "If a character in my novel recorded her husband's shady deals, would that hold up in court?" Lauren's hazel eyes had narrowed, but she'd played along, detailing one-party consent laws and evidence admissibility with a lawyer's precision. Their hypothetical chats evolved into strategy sessions, always under the guise of Evelyn's non-existent book. When she finally showed Lauren a transcript of Nathan bragging about hiding assets, the pretense dropped. "Evelyn," Lauren had said, closing her notebook, "if this is real, we're not just talking divorce. This is criminal." From there, the plan took shape. Lauren brought in a forensic accountant, posing as a research consultant for Evelyn's novel, who uncovered the prenup forgery, a subtle swap of pages Nathan had slipped past her 5 years ago, assuming she'd never read the fine print. Evelyn bought discrete recording devices, hid backups in cloud accounts and safe deposit boxes, memorized legal terms like wire fraud and tax evasion. She waited, biding her time until this night when Nathan's hubris would peak, and her patience would pay off. Back in the dining room, the dessert cart rolled in, its silver trays gleaming with chocolate tarts and creme brulee. The server hesitated, sensing the tension, but Lauren waved him forward. "Please go ahead," she said. "We're just wrapping up." Nathan's attorney, Greg Vaughn, burst through the doors, tie askew, sweat beading on his forehead. "Don't sign anything," he barked, striding toward Nathan. "What the hell's going on?" "Too late," Lauren replied coolly. "But you might want to advise your client about the IRS investigation." "What investigation?" Greg demanded, his voice cracking. Evelyn met Nathan's gaze, unflinching. "The one I triggered 6 months ago with a whistleblower report. All those nights I said I was on the phone with Lila? I was detailing your shell companies, your fake invoices, your offshore accounts to the Financial Crimes Unit." Nathan's face went ashen. "You couldn't, I don't understand enough to." "To what?" she cut in. "To document your tax evasion? To trace the $2 million you funneled through that Cayman subsidiary? I understood everything, Nathan. I just let you think I didn't." Colin stood, coat in hand. "I'm out," he said, his voice flat. "This is a liability I can't touch." 2 other associates followed, muttering about lawyers and exposure, their exodus a quiet stampede. Nathan's phone rang a shrill, insistent chime he'd set for his assistant, Mia. He answered, his voice trembling. "What do you mean they're at the office?" "Now. Don't let them, nothing, I'm coming." He hung up, grabbing his coat. "I need to go." "Emergency." "What kind?" Greg snapped, grabbing his arm. "Federal agents," Nathan admitted, barely audible. "They've got a warrant." The room tilted. Guests froze, then bolted, some for the exit, others to their phones, frantically checking their own ties to Nathan's empire. Evelyn remained seated, the eye of the storm, as 3 men in dark suits entered. The lead agent, a wiry man with silver hair and a clipped voice, flashed his badge. "Nathan Pierce?" he asked, though his eyes had already pinned Nathan by the door. Greg stepped forward. "I represent Mr. Pierce. What's this about?" The agent ignored him, addressing Nathan directly. "We have a warrant for your arrest, tax evasion, wire fraud, document falsification. You have the right to remain silent." As the Miranda rights echoed, Nathan's gaze locked on Evelyn. "You did this," he whispered, fury and disbelief warring in his voice. "What did you tell them?" "Everything you told me," she replied evenly. "Every call you took in front of me, every paper you left out, every lie you thought I was too stupid to catch." The second agent approached with handcuffs. Nathan recoiled, but there was nowhere to go. "This is a mistake," he insisted. "She doesn't understand." "Actually," the lead agent interrupted, "Mrs. Pierce's evidence is some of the most meticulous I've seen in 20 years. She's a natural." A third agent set a laptop on the table. "Mrs. Pierce, could you clarify a few transactions? The Larson account rerouting, for instance." "Of course," Evelyn said, leaning forward. "It started in April 24, but the bulk of the fraudulent transfers hit after the Bennett merger in July. The originals are in his safe combination 19-32-47, behind the Rothko print." Greg paled. "Nathan, shut up." Not a word. But Nathan wasn't listening. He stared at Evelyn, handcuffs clicking around his wrists. "All this time, you were just pretending." "I was surviving," she corrected. Tonight I stopped. The agents let him out, his protests fading into the hallway. The room emptied quickly, leaving her emerald bracelet on the table with a curt, "This isn't ours anymore." Richard trailing her in silence. Lila stayed, sliding into Nathan's vacated chair. "I knew he was awful," she said. "But this? Why didn't you tell me?" "I couldn't," Evelyn replied, her voice softening. "He had to believe I was harmless." Across the room, Tara's brother, Jake, a minor player in Nathan's circle, approached hesitantly. "I'm cutting ties," he said. "This is too deep. I've got kids." He didn't wait for a response, just left. Nathan's final plea came as the agents paused at the door. "Why here, Evelyn? Why humiliate me like this?" She stood, meeting his eyes one last time. "Because you needed to see what you'd done, not just the crimes but how you erased me. This wasn't just justice, Nathan. It was me stepping out of your shadow." He was gone before she finished, the doors swinging shut behind him. Lauren gathered her files, glancing at Evelyn. "You okay?" "I will be," Evelyn said, a faint smile breaking through. "The house is mine as of noon," another detail he never checked. Lila grinned. "You're a genius." "It's not over," Lauren warned. "The trial could drag on." "I've waited 5 years," Evelyn replied. "I can wait a little longer." The anniversary cake sat untouched, its silver 5-topper glinting mockingly. Evelyn picked it up, handed it to Lila. "Let's take it home. I'm done celebrating his version of us." 6 months later, the air was crisp with early summer, and Riverside Community College buzzed with life. Evelyn Harper again stood at the front of her classroom, her students' voices rising in a spirited debate over pride and prejudice. "Was Elizabeth Bennet naive?" a student asked. "Or just underestimated?" Evelyn smiled, leaning against her desk. "What does the text show us about perception versus reality? Look at Darcy's assumptions. How do they shape his downfall?" The discussion flowed, her students' insights sharper with each class. Teaching had been her refuge after the divorce, a return to the life Nathan had mocked her out of. Her bookshelves, once props for his narrative, now lined her office, their spines worn from use. After class, she headed to the campus cafe, where her financial literacy group waited a dozen women, from freshmen to retirees, notebooks open. What started as informal chats had become a mission, empowering others with the knowledge she'd weaponized against Nathan. Today, a new face lingered at the entrance. Tara, her blonde hair tucked under a baseball cap, eyes wary. "I saw your flyer," Tara said, shifting her weight. "Didn't know if I'd be welcome." Evelyn paused, then nodded. "It's for anyone who wants to learn. Come in." Tara hesitated, then followed. As Evelyn began explaining tax brackets and red flags, the women listened intently, pens scratching. Her phone buzzed mid-session. A text from her publisher. "Manuscript meeting confirmed. Hidden in plain sight is gaining traction. Women's shelters want copies." She smiled faintly. The book, a blend of memoir and guide, was her next chapter. Outside, the sun dipped low, painting the campus gold. Nathan's trial loomed, but it felt distant, a footnote to her new life. She glanced at her reflection in the cafe window, taller somehow, unburdened. 4 years she played a role to survive. Now she was writing her own story page by page, and it was hers alone.